Hi everyone, welcome along for the second panel here at Sunset Sports Festival, Cutting Through Marketing in the Age of Noise. So come on through, I hope you've got your coffee. We're getting ready to start. Anyone outside, come on in, we're ready. Before we kick things off, I'm joined on the stage by a trio of men who have really cut through the noise. They've worked with some incredible athletes, and I'm sure we're going to get some intel on how they've managed to tell stories in a unique way and really take these athletes to the next level. So immediately next to me, I've got Diego, known as a cultural connector, global creative leader. You worked with the likes of Ja Morant, of course, in the NBA at the moment, Vinicius Jr. as well in football. I've got Misha, who is the global head of sport and entertainment and culture, Essence Mediacom. Also worked with Vinicius Jr. amongst others, a common trait between the two of you. And then at the end there, we've got Domenico flying the Italian flag there, who is the global commercial director of Entourage Sports and Entertainment. So welcome, first of all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm sure people in the room will love to know what's the best way to tell stories in an age where we're just flooded with them. But as I mentioned, you've all worked with some incredibly big stars. So to start off, it would be really nice if we could maybe hear a story of an athlete you've worked with who maybe it was a little challenging to get their story across or to try and sell them to a bigger audience. So Diego, I'll start with you. Could you maybe set a scene for us with someone?
For sure. Thank you. I'll say this, I think, these days, after working with athletes for like almost 20 years, I realized that I'm not in the industry of sports or athletes. I'm in the industry of human beings, people. So I realized that I gotta know the human being first, so then I can understand the athlete and therefore leverage the athlete. I think, performance is amazing, but these days, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they want to know the real stories. They want to know who's the guy behind the cape, the guy dunking the basketball. They love that, but I also don't want to know, are you a father, are you a son? Do you make mistakes, to your point, to your question? Like I've dealt with some crises, and I've been on the other side of the crisis, which is like, what do you learn throughout those crises? And for me, learning who the human being is was key. Because after that, I was able to work on the athlete's image and come, even the athlete was like even better after that. So I think that's my take. I don't know what you guys think about it, but I think the human being first is what I believe in.
Who's maybe been one of the more challenging human beings? Could you tell us?
I guess.
The fun one. Let's put it that way.
This guy is both challenging and fun. Ja Morant, as you guys may have heard, had some issues as pretty much all of the athletes, that we know had issues in the past. I think it's about learning, sometimes, and obviously the media will focus on what happened because this, the media's role. But that was a big challenge, and we went through a big challenge with him. But then on the other side of that, now I know this guy, and now the other side is even more beautiful, and he's fun, besides being the guy who dunks on Wemby and all that, there's another trait, that we can talk about. It's the human being. It's either mental health. It's about, learning from your mistakes, and that's beautiful too. And as brands and, cultural connectors, we need to tell those stories. Those kids need to know that, yes, being a great athlete is amazing, but also being a great human being, it counts. And these days, the audience, they want to know about that too.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
Misha, how about you? Could you tell us a story with a particular athlete that you've worked with who you've maybe had to work a little harder to get their story across or maybe change a narrative?
Well, actually, speaking of, we mentioned Vinicius Jr., who I had the pleasure of getting to know when he was just coming through around sort of 19, 20 years old at Real Madrid. Sort of one of these really obviously talented Brazilians, but in the grand scheme of things, we have many of them, right? I mean, European leagues are flooded with very talented Brazilians that come over, and very few reach this sort of heights that I'm pleased to see him reaching now. But I remember having the conversation with him and the team at the time to say that, in this flooded, crazy, busy world, lots of noise. How are you going to stand out? How are you going to sort of elevate amongst other athletes, amongst other influential people, and give people a reason to care, right? And the way that we do that is that, to the point you were just making is, what's the story that people can connect with? Because the shortest distance between two people is a story, right? So when we started talking about how do we look to transcend football and everything he's doing, all the pictures he's posting about training and after training, before training, after, I said, all of that is all the same. There are people in your lives, there's a story, there's a narrative, where you come from, where you are, that will make people care. How do we do that? What's the story you want to tell? Who are the people that you want around to tell that story? Who are the publishers that we can work with? Where's the audience that is, that's following you, right? So, and at the time, this was a few years ago, we decided to create this short form content series called Vinny for Real, right? And we worked with Meta, Instagram at the time, to create these sort of 5-6 minute episodes about different aspects of his life, which we would drop once a week on that platform, because most of the audience that was following it was on that platform. And you would get millions of views within hours of publishing. And that's just an example. But it was just getting him to think, and him and the team to think beyond sort of what he was doing on the pitch, and to say, if you want to be elevated in popular culture, you have to start to think like a media company. You have to think like an enterprise, right? So what does that look like? Who would you work with? Who can help to amplify that story? Who are the partners that can help to elevate that? It was great. It was great to work with.
Was there any pushback at first when you suggested? Because I guess you're trying to make him stand out from the crowd.
There was pushback, because I think in general, when you work with athletes, the first thing they say, it's like, we don't want to come across like we have, like we don't care about our day to day. Again, he was just breaking through at the time. He wasn't anywhere near where he is today. So you don't want to come across as someone who's got, maybe has their eye off the ball, right? So there's that fine balance to strike between demonstrating that you are committed, focused on the football, and you're not getting distracted. But at the same time, that's just the world that we're, in the US, we don't even ask these questions. We know people are multifaceted. You can play sport and have interests at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. Actually, they're good. It's healthy.
Meanwhile, in Europe, it's quite a different story.
It's a very different story. There's this idea that he's distracted or she's distracted, should be focused. No, it's healthy. It's healthy to think about other things. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I'm so pleased to see, his journey progress in recent years. Obviously, working with partners like Nike has been amazing for him.
Domenico, I'd love to hear from you. Who has Entourage Sports worked with that you've enjoyed, I guess, sharing their story with the world?
From our point of view, I think the most representative is Roberto Carlos, being like a icon of football. But I think that the good thing that he has, I think, compared to the others, and what the guys were saying before, is that athletes needs to connect with the audience and to feel like real. And I think that is the fact that he's humble, he's funny. Every time he goes inside like a place, get recognized as a Brazil, a Real Madrid heroes. But I would like to tell a different story, actually, from someone that is not so famous, that had, thanks to him, we had an amazing idea that was very successful, which was Giuliano Belletti. And we worked with Giuliano Belletti, and he won the World Cup, and he has these 9 hours of raw footage with his own camera behind the Brazil of Pentacampeão. So with our CEO, Paul Brighton, and with our team, we decided to say, hey, what about if we create a documentary about this Brazil winning the World Cup and having 9 hours of raw footage behind the scene. And then Roberto Carlos and Ronaldinho, all these other big players, they came on board. And then it was a very, very successful documentary on Netflix in South America, etc. So sometimes don't think just that the mega athletes, they have something to say, but even if you have someone, with all the respect for Belletti, they won Champions League, World Cup, but everybody, in every sport, even before in fishing, they were saying, that will be the chance to create something unique that maybe nobody ever thought before, and very, very successful to create a trend.
It's so interesting hearing the common theme from all of you, that at the heart of it, there's a person there trying to get to know them, and then I guess, convincing them to be vulnerable with their audience. And then, just as you said there, Domenico, that there's also unique perspectives. It doesn't have to be the star who's going to be able to connect with others. Thinking about the people in the room who are trying to connect with their audiences, be it through their small or medium-sized businesses, when they are telling stories, what lessons do you think they could take from what you just told us, for example, Diego?
Yeah, again, I'll double down on the human aspect of that, right? Because
Does that mean, though, when people say that, we see more and more business owners, for example, being in front of the camera, you know? Before it used to be faceless companies. Are you saying get in front of the camera? What exactly do you mean by that?
I think you have to get in front of the camera these days. There's no way that you can get around that, you know? Like, if you think about your audience, you know, I'm talking about Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and Gen Beta, they have cameras on their hand 24/7. Yeah. They're on TikTok. They're, you know, gaming, you know, as they're playing video games, they're communicating with each other. So, you know, I think more and more is going to be less about the you know, big media outlets, big commercial, TV commercials. That's still going to be there, but you need to click down and understand where your audience is. I think someone mentioned that here. And at the end of the day, it's about people, you know, because we're just talking about AI here, which is amazing, you know, but there's always going to be a human aspect, you know, connected to AI. And when we think about sports, you know, I was just having a conversation here. We still don't know, you know, when athletes actually start engaging with AI, what that's going to look like. And I'm talking about athletes themselves, not us, not the managers, but the athletes themselves, you know, those brilliant minds that are on the pitch, on the court, doing amazing things. Imagine what those guys can do with AI. We don't know. We're going through that right now. So I guess the point I'm trying to make, you know, for the audience is that it's real. It's got to be real. You know, it's got to be authentic. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, a big production. To your point, you have a camera, you'll be able to connect with your audience right away. You know, if I get my phone right now and start a live, you know, on Instagram, I'll connect with my audience right away. You know, I don't need anyone else, you know, in between. And I think that's a big advantage, especially if you're not the big brands, you know, who have the millions or billions of dollars, you know, as a budget. You still can, you know, make a lot of stuff happen. And to his point, you don't have to have, you know, only the superstars. Maybe you have some athlete who's not necessarily super well known, but has a very, you know, engaging, compelling story that your audience might want to hear. So I think the opportunities are there, you know, it's getting bigger and bigger, and that's really exciting.
Misha, in terms of challenging, I guess, the hierarchy, if I can say, because there may be people in here who work in marketing departments who are having battles with the owners saying, let's try do this, but they're not so certain. What would you say to them to try and push past that, to convince them to try and be vulnerable and tell those stories?
Well, I think we look at the way that the world's moved in the last couple of years. You guys just made an interesting point. You can have really high production stuff that's going on, but actually how many creators are making things happen sort of in real time, driving audiences? What we're seeing actually is that there's a shift towards giving people some value, right, in whatever you're doing, right? So, if you know, in the context of marketing, most of us, you look around this room, will be in industries that are pretty commoditized. Like you have certain service or you have certain products. There are lots of other companies that do the same thing, right? So we know that. So the question then to ask is, how are you then showing up in a way that's totally different and unexpected to your audience? That'd be like, wow, I've never heard anyone in our category or in this business use these channels, speak this way, tell these stories. And that's what it is, because if the idea is we just want to show up, well, you can show up and you can be, you can get lost because you're using the same tactics, speaking the same language, talking about products and services that, people, you're competing for people's time, right? So the way to get beyond that is to think of, how are you showing up in a way that is totally unexpected for people? And that is, and having been in the business, having seen some of the best work that's been produced, it's usually because someone in that particular category, it could be beer, it could be automotive, it could be something else, they're challenging category norms, right, in every way. And the people are going like, I love that, right? Or at least you cut through and you become part of the conversation. So I think that's the question to be asked, right? How is this going to be different? How is this going to compete for people's time?
Domenico, as the commercial director of Entourage Sports, you're essentially pulling the purse strings. So I guess I'm flipping the question from what I asked Misha. If you are talking maybe to decision makers in this room, what would you say to them to maybe embrace more unique storytelling ideas and step out of their comfort zone?
I believe that, I don't know, CBS Sport, for example, is doing an amazing job. And why? Because I feel that the difference between them and someone else, I say already, is that instead of making us see something, they make us feel something. You know, they make us be part of it. We were discussing yesterday with Misha that, like the Mika that is very, you know, bubbly, buzzy, and then there is someone more serious, maybe like Roy, and then there is this nice interaction that can be maybe some people, some of us, maybe in a bar, having like in a pub watching the match, or like with our friends at home. So I feel more that when we speak with the brands, etc., we really try to say, be a little bit disruptive. And most importantly, what the people want to see that you have, what can you create new that was not done before. And you know, we are in a world where like someone like the Hawk Tua girl can, like with a snip, can become super famous, right?
Sorry, let's give context. Does everyone know what he's talking about? The Hawk Tua girl? Yeah? Everyone familiar?
So something so, I don't know, let's say very low level, whatever, culturally, can become very super famous. And let's not dig in too much into that, but like, I believe that everyone here, like they have an audience, they have like someone that's already interested in your sport, can create something unique, and there are many examples. I think just be inspirational, be like real to your audience, and always don't try to do what you want to do, what the hierarchy tell you to do, but really what your audience want to see from you, what will be exciting. Try always to think as the end part for me of the journey, and then reverse the formula. That's the only one way to be very successful, in my opinion.
Diego, picking up from what Domenico said about thinking about the audience, what have you done specifically with any of the work you've done with athletes to try and connect them closer to the audience, or work specifically with their audience?
Yeah, I think we're going through like a transformational moment in humanity, right? And I'll keep talking about, the generations, because that's the key right now, right? I'm in my mid-30s, I don't understand necessarily everything that's going on with Gen Z and Gen Beta. And these days, I'm not only dealing with like a Gen Z audience, I'm dealing with Gen Z athletes, which, it's another layer, to this whole thing. So you really have to be out there. You have to understand, an agency, giving you a briefing of what's going on, it's amazing. But if you don't get out there and talk to them and really try to understand, you're never going to be able to connect, because of technology, things are changing right now. There's something happening right now that I'm not aware of. There's a trend going on TikTok, or maybe there's a new platform that, I still haven't connected with. I need to understand what's going on, and I need to be able to talk to my athlete about it, Just like, giving the athlete a brief, I think, is no longer gonna work the way they used to work in the past. We need to be open, to learn what's going on. And I think the biggest thing for me is really learning about the audience. And there's no other way other than going on TikTok, going on whatever, knowing who Hakatua is. I'm not proud of that, but, I need to understand it's a culture, movement that happened, and, and I need to understand what's going on. So I think that would be my take on that.
Misha, is that a similar approach at Essence Mediacom? How do you, I guess, help your athletes get closer to their audience? Do you engage with the audience directly on behalf of the athletes? What's the process?
Yeah, I mean, every successful business that I know, in whatever, whether that's Amazon, whether that's Disney, whether that's Apple, Nike, the thing that they do incredibly well, and that's why they have the longevity, is because they are so good at understanding who their audience is. They understand who they are, and they're very deliberate in how they consistently sort of connect and deliver for their audience time and time and time again. It sounds really simple, and yet, most companies in the world are not able, are not able to do that. When we talk about athletes, we always want to make sure that we are, again, in the, sort of understanding the behaviors. What are people engaging with? What are, what's the sort of the adjacency? If we want to connect, we want to grow in US, or if we want to grow in a particular space, like what is going on there? How can we, again, authentically show up and start to build credibility and audience in a particular, because we want to be, because we want to be there, not tomorrow, but, in a few years' time. You look at, you look at Hailey Bieber, like these things are not happening by accident. You first build relevance in a particular space, then you can monetize that through e-commerce and so on.
And for context, Hailey Bieber, model, daughter of a huge actor, sold her beauty brand Rhode for what, $1 billion.
But before that, build credibility and influence in that space that allowed her to, down the road, to launch a beauty brand, which then she was able to sell. So I think it's that, I always come back to that intentionality, right? It's the thing that often is missing from both on the brands and from talent. And I think when you, oftentimes what I come across and where most of the companies and talent go wrong is that it's, it becomes quite transactional. Everything's like, here and now, we can do this, we can do that, okay. But where it doesn't actually build any equity, right? When you're a company and you want to work with an athlete, don't start with the answer, I want to work with Zlatan, or I want to work with whoever. Think about what it is that you'd like to do. What's the story that you want to tell? And then work out who is the conduit to be able to, to do that. And I think and then you co-create that, with the talent, rather than we know the answer, we have the brief, we give someone something, and that's where, we miss on that opportunity to create something of genuine value.
Domenico, at Entourage Sports and Entertainment, you mentioned thinking about the audience first and then reverse engineering to how you execute a plan. Do you have different strategies for different audiences?
Yes, and in general, going back to what they were saying, I believe that sometimes there is this fear, like of the athlete, to move away from the sport that they do to create something different. And actually, yesterday I was having an interesting conversation with the CEO of FIBA about that sometimes many athletes, even to our athletes, sometimes they say, oh, I wish I would have done that, but I was so concentrated in football, basketball, whatever it is. But then the discussion was exactly this, that how many opportunities that they lose maybe to interact with CEO of incredible brands that can inspire. And then I always say, let me understand 1 second. If Cristiano Ronaldo is doing his own YouTube channel with over 74 million, 0.2, whatever, audience, and he has the time to do it, or if LeBron James, that might be super busy, is doing very successful content creation, etc., and these are super mega athletes that makes all the money in the world, and they still find the time, etc., to do it. It means there might be something that everybody at any level should do. For a legacy in general, just to understand who you are, I don't know, I'm a big fan now of NBA, and I see, for example, Caruso is, I don't know why, someone that really inspired me because it's different, it's like hard-working guy. And I believe that Caruso is more similar to what any basketball fan player will look like, and maybe his story will be even more inspirational than LeBron, that he was touched by God, and say, hey, you are like me playing basketball, after MJ, but that's another story. But in general, I believe this. I believe that athletes should be like courageous, like the organization should be brave, to give to the fan base what they want. I think that us as agencies and agents should push, a little bit to disrupt. And at the end, just not have regrets at the end of your career, think, oh, I wish I would have done that, I didn't do it.
I think that's something that probably everyone in the audience can take to create content and engage with their audience without regrets, push the boundaries. You said disrupt a couple of times there. To round things up as we're getting close to the end, I'd love if you could all share with us maybe a campaign that a brand has done or an athlete that really surprised you because you learned something new about them, or I guess they were portrayed in a new light and it reached extreme heights. Anyone can start, please.
I need a second. Hold on.
I don't know, the campaign, I don't know. But for example, for me, something that really touched me was when Giannis lost and he was going out. I don't know if you all remember, and made that amazing speech, that, it's not about winning, he say actually to the journalists, oh, now, if you don't do blah, 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 you're going to be a loser if you don't get promoted this year, So I don't know, in general, another thing that really touched me this year was the Liverpool campaign with the child that had like some health problems, and that was viral. Again, these are all things I think that goes inside us, you know, like that. I think content that can really generate something that you will remember. I will remember this campaign forever, you know, like most likely, because it gave me something different. It made me think about, you know, like I'm a dad, you know, I'm lucky, you know, to not have this problem. And also the humanity of the players, you know, that sometimes people are like, think that they are gods, but behind the scene, they're like flesh and bones like us, and they have problems like us. And someone was speaking about, you know, mental before, like, and also the mental, like, on the esports, you know, like, imagine the athletes, the kind of pressure that they have. So, I don't know, anything against that is, for me, like, this campaign that are meaningful, whatever they are, even for commercial or not, like, can really touch the audience, and that the audience will remember it forever. That's, for me, the way to go.
Yeah, evoking a genuine human reaction from people. And yeah, I remember the campaign you're talking about with Liverpool. The poor little boy had a medical condition. He went to meet all of the players. It was a dream come true for him and his family. And of course, as you mentioned, it puts you in a state of gratitude because you're thinking, wow, but equally you're so happy for him that he's lived out a childhood dream there. Is there anything that comes to mind for the two of you?
It's hard because, you know, I've dealt with so many athletes, you know, but I guess we're all saying the same thing here, right? I think the human aspect these days is something that, you know, I can connect with. Someone is 5-year-old, my mom probably can connect with, you know, that as well. The challenge is it's a very crowded industry, right? So for you to be able to find those stories is really hard, you know. And again, I'm probably being repetitive here, but if you don't know the human being, you're never going to be able to get to that level, right? I had the pleasure to see, talking about Vini, you know, going to a Lakers game and connecting with LeBron after the game. And before, you know, we're waiting for LeBron to come out of the locker room, and Vini was like, bro, I'm shaking, you know? And I'm like, you are one of the biggest athletes in this planet. You know, you're one of the toughest guys in the world, you know, but right here you're being super vulnerable because that's your guy, you know, like growing up in Brazil, I know what it is, you know, seeing LeBron, it's like, you know, so that's what I'm talking about, right? Those guys are human beings too. So how can we as marketeers tell those stories? That is the biggest challenge because it sounds easy. It is not. Connecting with an athlete is not easy because those guys, they have a chip on their shoulder to do what they do on the court, on the pitch, and they're not open. It's hard to crack that, you know. So you have to spend time also, you know, trying to know that guy, spend some time, you know, and do that. And I'll finalize by saying probably the biggest story that I learned from an athlete was when I was able to go to his grandma's house and sit on her porch and see the family dynamic, you know. Like, that's very unique. There's nothing else that my company could have done for me, you know, in order to understand that guy better. And therefore, now I can use my power brand to now turn that into stories and compelling stories and tell that to the world. So, yeah.
And Misha?
Well, I've got a great, but probably one of my favorite stories is when I was working with Pele for quite a few years. We were working with Shell at the time, and Shell is investing a lot of money in new energy and so on. And there was this company they worked with, they partnered with called PaveGen. And the idea was that, imagine if all of us who are walking around these floors, when we're walking, we're generating energy that's lighting up the stage, that's lighting up, everything around us. So that using footsteps to regenerate. So we created, collaborating with, working together in terms of creating something that's really powerful in Brazil around the World Cup. We created this, built this football pitch in the middle of a favela, which struggles obviously with violence and so on because it's dark and kids can't play. But work with people in the favela to build a football pitch, where they play all day and it lights everything up around them at night. And Pele was there to launch this campaign. Now, why is this interesting? Because Pele is the most iconic, one of the most iconic personalities on the planet, Brazilian, has grown up in an environment like that. His real name is Edson, for those of you who don't know, named after Thomas Edison. The reason he was named after Thomas Edison is because the year he was born was the first year that they had electricity in his village.
Wow.
So for Pele to be more or less the face of the World Cup in his country, to be, come full circle, to be able to partner with someone to tell that story is really powerful, right? So it's those kinds of things that, it could have been very different. It could have been done something quite transactional, very corporate, but we went to the core of what really meant to Brazilian people, what was important to Pele, and how Shell as a brand can tap into that to create something that is far, far bigger than they could have done otherwise. So that's one of my favorite stories.
Wow. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for the second panel here. Of course, it was Cutting Through Marketing in the Age of Noise. Domenico, Misha, Diego, it's been an absolute pleasure. Of course, you can catch up with them around here if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
We have opportunity for Q&A if people want, because
perfect.
I feel like we might as well use the most
I was
of the time.
to the time. I was doing my job. It's
I
just
think
gone
we can
0,
open
0,
it
0.
up for 5 minutes. So if anybody has questions, please raise your hand. We have a floating mic. So
any questions? I can continue with questions.
While people are thinking, I'm going to ask the first question, but before I'd like to share an anecdote that Diego basically inspired me to, that I can attest to, that for sure you're going to relate. So I was playing in Indiana Pacers 2014, and we played Washington Wizards. And we're playing in Washington, and the entire Argentinian football team comes to the game with Lionel Messi, with everyone there. So at that point in time, it's probably the strongest football team on the planet. And they're watching us play. And here we are in the locker room, and Luis Scola, who's one of the most legendary, iconic Argentinian players, he's my teammate, so he's like, hey, you guys want to meet Messi? So here we are shaking, like, I can't believe we're about to meet Messi. And as we're walking toward the tunnel, and this is a true story, I swear to God, and Luis Scola is walking, and there's these all Argentinian superstars. I'm talking about guys that play at elite level, and Lionel Messi, and when they see Scola, they stop, and they start trembling, and they look at him like he's God. So at that point in time, I'm looking at Messi that is basically flabbergasted that he's seeing Scola, and the roles are reversed. And I'm thinking, wow, this can be happening. Like, really, really tremendous moment in which you really see that people have their role models, and before anything, just to attest to your stories, they're human, and they have idols, they have fears, they're built out of flesh and blood. That was a short anecdote that I wanted to share, but I have a question. Given that all of you are obviously super experts, decision makers, but you are all parts of big companies. Diego, you're with Nike. All of you guys have people, there's big systems. So for you, and we have plenty of marketing experts and people that work in marketing in the room, I would like to know your day-to-days and your processes, because what if you have a fantastic idea that you know is going to cut through, and the bosses, they say no? And the company says, this is not for us. Do you just move on, or just on a personal level, how do you guys go about pushing your ideas through?
Man, the story of my life. That's the story of my life. I think that's the biggest challenge, right? I think my role is like, to understand the athlete's role, but also understand my company's role, right? And big companies, I'm not here talking on behalf of Nike. It happens in all the companies. Big corporation, all these layers, right? And someone has an amazing idea on this side that doesn't connect with the athletes, or the athlete wants to do something that doesn't connect with the brand. It's my role to try to find that sweet spot, and that is hard. There's no formula. I've been for 15 years trying to figure that out, and every single week there's something going on. But again, I think when I go back to like really knowing my athlete, I have a lot of power when I go back to the company, because nothing can trump that. If that's really real, and if you're really speaking with authority, like, the company will understand. It's not gonna work 100% of the time, but at least in my experience, Nike, outside of Nike, anywhere, I think really knowing that athlete has been my superpower, and I think I've been able to do some stuff using that.
Difficult, very loaded question. But I've worked with so many different companies across, some much more conservative, some much more sort of forward thinking. But at the end of the day, I think it's how you go on that persuasion journey with them, right? So it's not so much I have this amazing idea and you should buy it. It's sort of how do it's your ability to articulate why it's a good idea. And in my experience, showing some proof points of saying, look, this is why I think that. Look at how some of our competitors or some of like, this is what's happening in our sort of in our world. This is why these kinds of things are cutting through. This is what people want. This is what they gravitate around. So we need to be thinking about, yes, on one hand, you need to be thinking about your business and your product and so on, but more importantly, you need to think, to my earlier point, it's like, how are you showing up to become part of that conversation? Not around the conversation, but part of that conversation. The way that we do that is by, really understanding sort of the zeitgeist and the behaviors and, creating something that is, again, designed more around the audience and less around our desire to tell a message or sell a product and so on. So, but, I don't know any two conversations that were ever the same, but I quite enjoy the process.
I think we have a question here behind me. Is the gentleman ready?
Yes. Hi there, I'm Dražen. I'm an alumni of brands like L'Oreal, Puma, and also Creative Artists Agency. Congratulations to you guys and also to the organizers. I think it's an amazing event. Thank you for being here. Quick question. What do you think about a trend that agents are leaving big organizations and making a separate micro organization with athletes? Like we had the recent example with Arina Sabalenka leaving IMG and Naomi Osaka and a couple of these examples. Like what are the advantages of leaving a big organization and making it on your own with the athlete versus being part of a bigger organization, maybe Diego or Domenico, and also Misha, please, everyone.
Domenico, want to take
What do you think?
Yeah.
I can start because I was before Juventus with Cristiano Ronaldo. I left to go like in a smaller, let's say, organization. For me, I think that it goes back to what like Misha was saying before. I think that if you had that care, like similar happened to Georgina Rodriguez, like that his agent is like the one that was looking after her, but then they create the agency together. I think it's about like feeling about like if you understand, we were discussing this yesterday, that the people that you are in front, at the end it's about people. The big agency, the names, okay, yes, about the rights, but then who makes the decision are people. And if the people that makes the decision, they're very smart, they can help you, it doesn't matter what's the name on the door. So that's why I believe that some athletes prefer to have a more taken care of, nurturing, like small, like organization that can really help you to grow. And it's about focus. If you're sometimes in a mega organization, if you're not LeBron, let's say you are number 50 maybe of that agency, where if you are like in a relatively nice size agency and then they put all the effort and all the eggs on the basket for you, I know we are lucky, for example, to manage the image rights of Luka Modric. And, we're doing, I believe, a good job with it, and hopefully even more. But I believe that is about personal touch, and if the people that make the decision, you trust them to make great decision, at the end, the brand, it doesn't matter. Sometimes most of the agents are the parents or someone else coming out of the woodwork, like, and that I don't recommend. But as long as there is the expertise to make big decision, I believe that it doesn't matter the name of the door. It's the people that represent you that matters.
I mean, I think it's an excellent question, and I think this is going to continue. This is going to be a trend. I think a lot of athletes will leave because there's a total misalignment of priorities. We're seeing on one hand these agencies becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's the incentive is volume, transactions, short-term incentives, where they understand that nowadays, right, athletes have never been in a better time to build long-term enterprise value. To do that, you need people around you who think about you, who understand where the world is going, who have a vision to be able to say, this is why we're going to do certain things in the short term, medium term, because we're planning for the next 10, 20, 30 years. That goes against the way that most agencies operate, because they want to capitalize now, they want to maximize profit today, and to Domenico's point, when you have so much, on your roster, you're going, we've got 1,500, we've got 2,000 athletes. They don't want to be a number. They don't want to be a number, and they don't have to be a number now. right? So they're going off. They're building their own, their own setup around them with a couple, 1, 2, or 3 really, really smart people, advisors who people understand media, people who understand business, people who understand e-commerce and so on. The things that will actually help them build beyond their careers. And these people think about that all day, every day. And at these big agencies, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I'll just say real quick, I think, technology has a big part on that too, right? Because I think these days, if you have a cell phone and you know an athlete, there's a lot that you can do with that alone. Whereas in the past, you needed to have, the influence to connect with the CBS of the world and put your athlete, on television. Look at NIL these days, there's some small basketball player in a small city, his buddy has a phone and now he's, his manager, he's the one managing his career because he has access to the athlete and he can put out content, immediately. So I think technology also has, a big role on that transformation.
Thank you for the question. I think that wraps it up. Thank you again, Domenico, Misha, Diego.
Thank you very much.